Hi everyone, welcome to Lecture 8. This is all focused on planning for 3-year-olds and above, especially as we start to move into our mandated curriculum that we have from SCASA and our Australian curriculum. In the following weeks, we'll look at planning for under 3-year-olds. And so we're looking at a little bit more of a variety of curriculum approaches at that one. So what we're looking at is why do we plan? How do we know what we're planning and teaching? Long-term versus our short-term planning, planning for our whole class, our small group and our individualized plans, and obviously some ideas of how we create our plan. So why are we documenting what is going on in our classroom? So we have a professional requirement, and that is often enforced at a school level and at a system level. It should serve as our accountability to inform our families, our caregivers, as well as our school. It makes sure that we follow an appropriate curriculum design. It helps us to understand what's going on in the classroom at the individual level and as a cohort. So what are they doing really well? Where are some things that we need to pay a bit more attention to? And what are some general trends, positive or negative, that we might be experiencing? Now, why do we need to document that? We need to make sure that we are providing good pedagogical documentation at planning and at assessment level so that we make that learning very visible to the parents, children, ourselves, and so on. We want to make sure that it's not just looking at end products, but we've got that process in there as well. We're making sure that with the process, we're looking at all of the ideas of how we listen, question, research, and reflect. We make sure if we're looking at products that the product also allows us an opportunity to record some of the process that the students participated in, and that it might be something that we're co-creating with them. And of course, we've got our intentionally planned experiences as well as our child initiated, so that we can make sure that we are documenting all of that in the best way possible. So how do we know what we're going to teach? So when we're planning for 3-year-olds and above, we're looking at our pre-kindies, our kindies, our year ones and pre-primaries, our year ones and our year twos, and sometimes our year threes. So you're looking at your early years learning framework. With then, of course, if we're working with our kindies, we've got our kindy guidelines that we explored a couple of weeks ago. We've then got all of our natural observations and assessment about what the children are able to do and what they love doing and so on. And then we have our mandated curriculum from the Australian curriculum rewritten into our SCASA guidelines as well. So that's what we have to teach. Sometimes it's very clear, other times it's a little bit more judgment based from the teacher in the classroom. So if we look at this is something that is at a core of a lot of our early childhood staff. So they want to think, how do we plan for children from a strength-based perspective rather than looking at it from a deficit perspective? When we consider a deficit perspective, we're looking at what they can't do. So what we really want to do is we want to work on what they know, and we want to build on those skills and concepts that they know. We don't want to focus on what they don't know and try and fill in the gaps. We want to look at what do they know and let's enhance it. So we have to think about this from the perspective of two things. What do they know? So that's the content. And how are we going to teach it? So we want to start with thinking in our planning. What are the things that we want to make sure the students are really clear about? And again, we can plan for that, or it can come from the children. We can't always assume it can be 100% child-led when we're talking about our formal years of schooling. However, when we're talking about 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, it can be very student-centered. When we're talking about our 5, 6, 7 and 8-year-olds, there's a lot more influence from our curriculum and external guidelines. So we need to make sure that we understand sometimes we have certain content we must cover, and other times we're a lot more liberal with what we're able to cover. And then our pedagogy, that's where we get to be the cool teachers. We get to be the people making those authentic decisions about what's going to happen. So when we're thinking about our planning and how we plan good experiences for our children in our class, we number one must know our children. You must know the little people that you have in your room with you. So know and understand them, not just the basics, but really get to know their stories. We also have to know our curriculum. So if you're working in pre-primary and above, you have to know what is your mandated curriculum. It's not a negotiable element in a classroom. We have to teach the curriculum. How we teach it, that's our choice. So knowing your curriculum means that we have all these opportunities that we just have to work out what we're going to do. Know what you have available in your classroom and in your centre and in your local area, as well as resources that you might have access to that are beyond your school. So know what you have available. There's no use planning UB things, but you can't do them. So think, what do you have available? What can you access? What are the possibilities in your school? Think about what are your strategies that you're comfortable with. So if you're comfortable with a certain style of strategies, use lots of those, but then implement a range of other strategies as well. And to plan effective experiences, we have to understand how we are assessing effectively as well. So we have to think, right, what do I need to know about the children in order to plan my best experiences for them? So how do we get to know our students? Obvious one, we do lots and lots of observations. We understand where they're coming from. We understand what they can do. We understand what they're struggling with. We use our assessment, our formal and our informal assessments. And you might also think about, can you at the beginning of the year do some interviews with previous teachers and or caregivers in some form? So that way you go, oh, there's our possibilities of what we could do, and that's our starting point. So when we're considering our planning, we want to make sure that we are planning for our whole cohort. We're also planning for small groups as well as individuals. So let's look a little bit more at how we plan for individuals. So we have to always think, why are we targeting a particular child? So if we value that they're unique with their own unique strengths, we need to cater for them. So we need to make sure that we're not just paying lip service to it. We have a responsibility to make sure that we are giving them the best opportunities possible to address their learning needs. We can't teach a whole group without understanding the individuals. So we have to think, how are we going to cater for our individuals? So we might have focus children at particular points in time. We might have particular observations that are identifying interests and needs of different children. We might do a range of ideas of how we choose our focus children. So we might use a sociogram. We might do observations on who's playing with who so that we can work out what social skills we need to plan for. We might do lots and lots of different activities so that we collect a range of different data. So we need to think, what are the benefits of planning for the individuals? So if we're planning for the individual, we're making sure that we are catering for each person's needs within our room, which of course is then going to cater for everybody that we are working with at that point in time. So when we plan for individuals, that's what we do. Let's look when we're planning for groups, that's what you need to think about in terms of commonalities. So you might have certain skills or concepts that a group need, and that group could be 5 children. It could be the whole 20-something of your class. So you might have a whole class that needs some work on their listening skills. So particularly when you're working with our pre-kindies and our kindies, understanding that we all need to do things at certain times and that we all need to listen and we all need to concentrate. They're skills that you can develop in different forms. Cooperation, I know with my kindy children, we played a lot of games that required turn taking because we had a lot of children who had not ever had those opportunities. So we had to plan for groups of children to learn how to play with one another cooperatively and taking turns. So when we think about our groupings, we might have our whole class for our very much our direct instruction and our explicit intentional teaching. We might have ability groups for a particular cognitive aspect that we want to develop. We might create mixed ability groups because we're working on a whole lot of our social skills in different ways. We might allow children to have friendship groups that are working on different things. You might develop different activities that are particularly targeting certain children with that particular interest. And of course, we can always have our random groups. So when we're thinking about planning for our individuals or our groups, we have to make sure that we know our curriculum really well. So make sure that you are really familiar, not just with English and mathematics, but make sure you understand all your curriculum. In our early years, we want to integrate our curriculum as much as possible. So understanding, when I'm working in our pre-kindy class, what are kindy guidelines, what are my developmental milestones, where am I going to? When I'm working with my year ones, I have to know where they've been to in pre-primary, what types of things they were doing really well at, and the types of things that they struggled with a bit, so I can start to plan. If I'm working with my younger year levels, and we'll talk more about this with the 3-year-olds and under, then I might be looking at my learning centres and my curriculum that is coming out of my childcare, and what is that curriculum going to look like. So we always have to think, what are your resources? So we know there is a huge amount of resources that are available. So you've got your online resources, some of which you can find free. I know that when we did our provocations the other week, lots of you were finding amazing things through Pinterest and different people's websites, different people's Instagram and TikTok pages. You've also got paid resources like your Teachers Pay Teachers, your Teach Starter, your Twinkle, and so on. You then need to think, what are the school-based programs? And oftentimes these are non-negotiable. So schools take on entire programs, like Talk for Writing is one that I find quite often being done in a lot of our schools at the moment. Think about what are your system resources. So if you're working in the Ed department, within their icon, they have huge amounts of resources that are available for every year level. You may have a school that takes on a commercial program, or you might trial a program in your pre-primary classroom. So you might use something like Origo Maths. There might be subscription programs that you can use, things like Reading Eggs and so on. Not saying that they're great, but know the resources that you have available at your school. If you have those resources available, find out how you access them and how you can use them. What are other teachers doing with them, and so on. So when we think about our planning, let's go through our steps. So you first of all need to consider what you need to cover versus the children's needs and interests. And you want to create that nice hybrid of the two. You then start to think through your overviews. What are your yearly and your term overviews for your learning area and your domains? So that's where you might bring in, when you're working in your formal years of schooling, pre-primary and above, you have a clear curriculum. When you're working with your pre-kindies and your kindies, you've got kindy guidelines, and then you've also got developmental checklists that you can start to look at to make sure that you're progressing in the right format. Then you develop programs. They could be term or 5-weekly learning area, domain plans. Some people work on only a 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the age bracket that you're working with and the type of school that you have. You then distill that down further into your weekly plans, which are usually written as a daily work pad. And then you have your daily activities, which is your lesson plan. Now, graduated teachers who are experienced don't write lesson plans, but I'm talking about how do you plan your time from 9 o'clock till 10:30. So lesson plans are used for prac, but not for our practicing teachers. So let's have a little look at some of these planning documents and what they can start to look like. So we start large. We've got our West Australian Kindergarten Curriculum Guidelines, our Evidence Standard Yearly Planner. So it's linking in your outcome, it's got your focus areas, and then you've got some things that you are seeing. This is evident when children do this. So you take these types of planning documents and you divide them up and you say, this is what I'm going to cover in each term throughout my year. And you've got multiples of all of these depending on the year level and the age bracket that you're working with. You then might have something like your forward planning document, and your forward planning document is 5 weeks, or it could be a term, it might be less. So this is a standard sort of documentation that you might use when you're out on prac. So your forward planning documents, generally you plan for one learning area and there is a period of time that you plan for, 2 weeks to 10 weeks, depending on the class, year level, so on. It describes the learning and the pedagogical choices that you will make, and you generally plan it ahead, and then you go back and adjust it if you need to. Now remember, we're focusing for this one on our 3-year-olds and above, so we're heading into our more formal years. So then thinking about things like your learning centre plan, such as you have with your next assignment where we're doing the planning. So with your learning centre plans, you might have multiples of these sorts of things if you're working in a pre-primary room or a kindy room. You might have things like your rotational tasks that are very focused on your literacy time or your maths rotations and so on. So you want to think about what that planning looks like, and that becomes the planning for a day or over a period of a few days. So when you think about what you do, you have to go, these are my big areas that I'm planning for, all the way down to what am I planning for tomorrow. Now, if we have a look at what an internship, so this is your final school placement. So these are the types of things. So this might be a daily work pad. It looks very daunting when you look at it. It's all color coded. So it's all arranged in domains. It's color coded to allow the EA and the teacher to know what to plan, when to plan, and how to go about the process of planning. You're making sure that you are then taking that down into what are you actually going to set up in each of your environments. So you can see on the left-hand side of this one, there is staff remaining in the area, and the indoors, you've got different people organised for different places and different children. So your outdoor environment, how are you going to organise that? And let's have a look now at what it looks like for practicing teachers. So they're not as detailed as what might be required on school placements. So a religious education forward planning document, nice and simple, just guiding it through each of the lessons that you have to do. So you've got your year 1 writing, so it's very clear, these are the types of things that you're doing, taken straight from the curriculum, and then dividing it out into your different lessons and what it could look like. So again, very simple, but linking it back to curriculum outcomes at every point. You've got a daily work pad that just briefly describes what's going to happen. And as a practicing teacher, you focus on the outcomes, not just the objectives. But you would have, in most classrooms, you would have your learning intention and your success criteria, or your WALT and your WILF, or your objectives. You'll have something that will guide you and the students through the process of learning. So again, with your daily work pad, nice and simple, clear explanations, and easy enough for somebody else to use. Remember, these are practicing teachers who have already gone through the process of making sure that they know what they're teaching and why they're teaching. So when we're thinking about our planning, we want to make sure that we are always keeping in mind the idea that we start with what the children know and we move from that point. We don't start with what they don't know. We start with what do they know and we move forward. And our final part, I love this with the blowing in the wind, is although we plan, we have to make sure that we are always being flexible and prepared to change that in some way. Because depending on the children, depending on the day, depending on the topic, some things might be something they absolutely love and really get into, and other times you spend all this effort planning and then it becomes a fizzler and you're like, wow, that was not fun. So, final review, thinking about this. Planning begins with decisions about how and what you will plan. And when we're planning for 3-year-olds and above, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, the most you have are the kindy guidelines. And of course, you've got your EYLF. But that's not real planning documents. They're the things that determine why you're planning things the way you are. When we're working with 3 and 4-year-olds, we have to understand our children that we are working with and what our little learners need in order to enhance and grow in some way. So you must know your children, you must know your curriculum, you have to understand the resources you have available. Think about what are the teaching strategies that help me deliver the best learning experiences that I can, and then how am I going to make sure that I have good assessment strategies that allow me to then create my plan, teach, assess cycle on the next level. Our planning that we do at our undergraduate level is different to the planning you will see from experienced teachers when you are out in schools. So you need to be really clear that your planning is going to be more detailed for the next couple of years, and then it will drop down once you're in the classroom. Your objectives that you do, they are absolutely crucial. And remember, objectives guide everything, and they must be specific, observable, measurable, and achievable. And above all, planning must be flexible and adapted to the needs of the children. So our tutorial this week, we are looking at how we come up with good, rich questions to guide our provocations and our inquiry that will then lead to effective planning for our 3-year-olds for our next assignment. So hopefully that made sense, and I will see you all in class later in the week.